There are some revelations out of Hawaii on the hurricane. I'm sorry, on the fire. I mentioned hurricane because actually the alarms that didn't sound, it's now being argued, and I want to say credibly argued by Hawaiian officials, that those alarms, which we identified as typically being used in tsunami situations, are the wrong alarms to sound in a fire situation. And for that reason, they say they deliberately did not sound those alarms. So when it comes to natural disasters, and in Hawaii, they deal with hurricanes, they deal with tsunamis more regularly than they do with the kind of wildfire that we've seen. Certainly, I mean, well, this is I think once in a lifetime, many lifetime type fire. I mean, it's complete engulfing of these areas to the point that, they literally can't recognize many who lost their lives there. I mean, that puts it in a different category. But the point is, it wouldn't have been helped, the situation, they argue. This is Hawaiian officials. I can read you some quotes. It wouldn't have been helped, that situation, by the alarms, because the alarms are designed to tell people that there is a tsunami, move away from the coast and go inland. We did hint at this the other day, Kim. I think we talked about this, that we were just kind of spinning because we were trying to figure out why they didn't. Now, that may not be the real reason they didn't post the alarm or sound the alarm, but that's the reason they're giving now. So, do you mean to digress? Yeah, go ahead.
So what you're saying is it was the wrong alarm, so we'd rather have no alarm?
Yeah.
I mean, what?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying.
Doesn't there need to be some indication that something bad is afoot and you need to, pop your head up, look around, and get out?
Yeah, I mean, that I think is a decent point. I hadn't intended to start the show this way, but why not? We're talking about it, so let me get...
The Mark Thompson Show.
Sirens were silent during the Lahaina fire. Maui's emergency chief says that he doesn't regret it. The story from the LA Times. Herman Andaya, who leads Maui's emergency management agency, defended the decision not to sound warning sirens as they review the emergency response to the Lahaina fire and what could have been done differently. Why weren't the sirens sounded? Andaya talked about it during a Wednesday afternoon press conference. Do you regret not sounding the sirens? I do not, Andaya responded. The death toll from the fire has risen to 110, with 38% of the burn zone searched. Families and friends have held out hope for missing loved ones, as more than 1,000 people remain unaccounted for, as you're probably aware. Andaya said I'm sorry, go ahead.
111 now, and 1,000 people still on the missing list.
So Andaya said the island's outdoor siren system was designed for tsunamis, not wildfires. It is not part of the agency's standard response protocol. Quote, the public is trained to seek higher ground in the event that the siren has sounded, he said. The agency used several other types of emergency notifications to alert people to the fire, he said. Some of the systems used were wireless emergency alerts, which send text messages to residents, and the emergency alert system, which broadcasts emergency notifications through television and radio.
Look at that. Radio is important again. That was the only thing. That's the only way people were getting messages, is through the traditional radio in their car radio. They would get in the car and turn on the radio, and they would get the emergency information they needed. They didn't get it on their cell phone. They weren't notified about the emergency on the cell phone because the cell towers were down. The cell service was down. The landlines were down. The power was out. So it was emergency radios, and the radio stations had backup generators and kept running. So in this emergency, it was radio mainly that got the information. So what you're saying is, basically, or what he's saying is, they couldn't use the phone notification system because landlines and cell phones were down. And he decided, or the system malfunctioned or whatever, and they couldn't use the tsunami sirens. So no warning. No warning was better than anything else. I just think that's ridiculous.
He said that many of the sirens are along the coastline, not on the mountainside of Lahaina, which is where the fire ignited. Hawaii Governor Josh Green backed Andaya at the news conference, recounting his own experience when he came to the state to practice medicine. Quote, "When I first moved to Hawaii, people told me if you hear a siren, it's a tsunami, and to go to high ground." Now, Andaya is also getting a lot of criticism that he's not qualified to lead an emergency team. His qualifications or lack of qualifications are now being very much a part of this story. The Honolulu Civil Beat, which is a nonprofit news organization, right on for nonprofit news organizations, they published an article yesterday, and they called out Andaya's lack of work in emergency management leadership before his selection to lead the EMA. When a reporter mentioned the article, essentially what the article stated, because I read it yesterday, it suggested that he was an aide in the governor's office. He was the right-hand person at the governor's office, and or the mayor's chief of staff, I think is what he was, actually, to be specific. And as a result of that relationship, he got that job, not as a result of qualifications. That was the essential allegation of the article, or certainly the implication. In any case,
what's the job? It's the emergency services person for Maui?
Yeah, the emergency management leadership position for Maui. Exactly.
Is that supposed to be a cush job? Like
the emergency
all the
management
systems
agency
are already in place, so what do you have to really do except babysit a system that's already up and running?
So he was confronted about this yesterday, and he defended his work and his history. He said, "I spent 11 years as the Maui County mayor's chief of staff, later as the deputy director of the county's Department of Housing and Human Concerns. During that time," he said, "he went through numerous trainings and often reported to the Emergency Operations Center. He also said he had to complete a civil service exam and was vetted by emergency managers before he was selected for the role. To say I'm not qualified, I think, is incorrect," Andaya said. The rest of the essential aspects of this talk about the community, obviously going through one of the worst things that they could ever imagine. And the searches go on. But there are questions as to warnings. And honestly, I think the questions, and these are the questions that we're familiar with, all too familiar with in Paradise, California. I think the questions have to be asked about evacuation routes and the limited arteries out of there. I mean, there was basically one road. Isn't that right, Kim?
Yeah, there's two ways, but 2 ways in and out, and that's it. A very limited egress and ingress to that area. I was talking to my husband yesterday about why nothing was done, why the warnings were issued. You talked about it on this show about how a couple of years ago, Maui was designated an extreme fire risk area, and the list of 50 things they could do to help prevent loss of life like this were given. And I was saying, why couldn't Maui have learned the lessons that we've already learned in California, where we've instituted the public safety power shut off in the high winds, or we have different things that because of wildfires we operate differently now. Why couldn't they have learned the lesson from us? And he said, because you don't spend the money and you don't take the time to do the upgrades and make the changes unless you feel the pain.
Now, I think
And I
that
thought that was
sadly
really
is true.
interesting that you have to go through it yourself to realize how you need to change. You can't take someone else's lesson. You've got to go through it. So you would always think maybe, oh, we've got time to make these changes. Oh, we don't have to spend this money right away on the fireboat. So we don't have to do all these things they're asking us to do. And I'm so sad that it has to come to this before the changes are made.
I think that the kind of warning system that's in a way already in place for the tsunamis, that could have been expanded. So, when he says, well, most of the warning sirens are along the coast, well, then expand them. Put the warning system and the warning siren speakers, place them in other places strategically away from the coast toward inland, and then develop 2 different signals. One is the tsunami signal, and one is the wildfire signal. I mean, it really isn't that hard.
I would argue that when you go out of your house thinking there's a tsunami and there's smoke in the air, you're not running toward the fire. You can see it as you head that way. I don't think people are complete idiots. They would figure out that, oh, it's a fire, not a tsunami.
Well, it is idiotic that there is only one siren. It is. I'm sorry. That it is idiocy. And here's the other thing on that. After everything goes down and we're, cut to today, people could say, well, they sounded the wrong siren. It was the tsunami siren, and we're told to run inland, and then lawsuits ensue. So, I mean, you could see that. I mean, I'm not saying that's what happened, but if that is the general warning from that siren, then I kind of do understand it. That said, again, develop another sound. We have them. You have the air raid siren, and you have the fire siren. Even these emergency vehicles have different kinds of sirens on them. So I look, again, this seems as though it was a lot of things coming together that were uncontrollable. And I don't know to what extent you could have saved all of those sweet souls who lost their lives. But I do know that this system is insufficient, and it can be improved upon and should be improved upon. So that's what I walk away with at the end of all of this. That changes do have to be made.
In San Francisco, there's an emergency siren. It doesn't designate fire or earthquake or tsunami or anything. It's just the emergency siren. They test it. They used to test it every Friday at noon. It would go off for a minute. Did you ever experience that when you're in San Francisco?
I don't remember
the sirens
it,
are
no.
whirr, you're like, oh, yeah. It's every Friday.
Well, Friday at noon, I was so inebriated. I would not have noticed.
You were already down at Grumpy's having a drink. Yeah, that's
exactly.
How
I mean, you could find me at the. But you couldn't tell what it was, though, Kim. You're saying, okay, there's some emergency going on. I don't know what it is.
Some emergency meant, you need to take some kind of action. Something's happening. The siren's going on. There's an issue.
Well, that's a little, again, I think that's a little generic for much thing. There's Mark. This is Jim saying this. I haven't read this. I just see it. Mark, there is no such thing as a wildfire siren. There was no large history of the fire threat in that area. Why would they put wildfire sirens in an area that's not known for having massive wildfires? Well, I'm sure you're right about the fact that there's no wildfire siren. What I'm saying is one should be developed now. But I would take issue with the second part of what you said, which is there is no history of a wildfire threat in that area. Now, you may be partially right. Please don't misunderstand me. I think that there is certainly nothing on record along the lines of what we've just seen, but it is an area. I mean, I'm talking about Hawaii. They do have a wildfire season there, just as we do in California. Now, again, they don't have a history of the sort of destruction that we have or that we've seen in Hawaii, but they do have a season where they're more prone to fire. So all I'm trying to say is, and maybe I'm, making a point that doesn't need to be made, but they should develop, I think this is the point that should be made, they must develop another warning system. And obviously, they need to improve the way that people can get out of there. I mean, you just cannot have everybody squeezed into that little area. That's what happened in Paradise. That's what happened in my neighborhood. I lost my neighborhood to fire. We got out of there early. You got to get out of there early. Because if you're it's a bunch of people, these are, they all have their Lexus SUVs or whatever the hell they had in my neighborhood, and they're packing their crap in. They're all well-off people. I mention that because they all feel like they should be cutting you off in traffic and getting to where they're going because it's more important to where you're going. So you got a bunch of people like that. They're squeezed into and everybody's angry and, Scared, really scared. Mm-hmm. And it's just not sufficient. So, look, whenever the kind of elements that came together in Hawaii come together, it's not going to be a happy ending, but things can be done. And to your point, Jim, if there's no wildfire siren, and clearly there isn't, I believe they should develop multiple siren sounds. Now, Tony, I want to. What did you have for me? You have some video, or what do you have?
I have the video from the press conference where they confronted him with the. It's really good, but
really?
why he didn't play the sirens.
Yeah, go ahead and run. Go ahead and run it then, please. Thank you.
Do you regret not sounding the sirens?
I do not.
And the reason why, and
So many
Do you regret
people
not
said
sounding the
they would be
sirens?
saved if they had time to escape.
Would lives have been saved if they'd had
Siren
time?
gone off, they would have known that there was a crisis emerging. And as we know, so many bodies were found in the ground.
Do you want him to give you the answer, or
I
do you
do,
want
but
to
I
get?
wanna- I
Well,
wanna
then let
get
him
it out
finish.
there.
Let him finish his
I'm
answer.
sorry, there's a lot of people.
Well, you're
who
talking,
want
and you're not letting him
answers.
talk. If you want to talk, come up here.
I'm ready for the answer.
Then wait.
the sirens, as I had mentioned earlier, is used primarily for tsunamis. And that's the reason why many of them are found, almost all of them are found on the coastline. The public is trained to seek higher ground in the event that the siren is sounded. In fact, on the website of the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, the following guideline is provided. If you are in a low-lying area near the coastline, evacuate to high grounds, inland or vertically to the fourth floor and higher of a concrete building. Alerts may also come in the form of a wireless emergency alert. Had we sounded the siren that night, we're afraid that people would have gone malka. And if that was the case, then they would have gone into the fire. And so that is the reason why our protocol has been to use WEA and EAS. By the way, I should also note that there are no sirens malka or on the mountainside where the fire was spreading down. So even if we sounded the siren, it would not have saved those people on the mountainside.
All right, that was good. Thank you. That really was good. Thank you, Tony. There was a moment in that press conference where the dude comes forward and Square is right, where he goes, "Hey, are you want him to answer, or do you want him to, And that was a chit moment for sure.
There was
Yeah,
no
you gotta let him-
aloha at that conference.
No, they the
There's a lot
aloha
of-
is.
There's a lot of blame going on. People are angry. They're at the point where, first it was devastation. It's the stages of grief, and now they're into it's anger. How could this have happened? And I think that the key piece of that anger is that report that you read showing that it was deemed an extreme fire risk area with a list of things that needed to be done, and no steps were taken.
Thank you. That's exactly right. It was a 1,000-page report. I talked about it the other day.
Nothing
And
was
they
done.
had, yeah, when it wasn't just a report, there were recommendations, as Kim says. So, and the last thing I'll say, gosh, I didn't expect that we were going to talk about this for so long, and it's such a grim subject, and this perhaps is going to make it no less grim. But just because of when it hit and the way it hit, they're worried that children are a large share of the dead remaining. Schools are closed. Parents left children at home while they worked. And sadly, that may be, yet another fact that emerges out of all of this in Hawaii. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.